Grace and peace, St. Luke and friends. For the next 5 Sundays, the gospel will give us more than enough slices of bread. We will be looking at the Gospel of John, and for 5 Sundays, we'll be talking about bread. Jesus as the bread of life, and it starts with the feeding of the 5,000 this coming Sunday. And Jesus sees all these people there, and he says to them, to the disciples, you give them something to eat. And there were 2 miracles here. The first miracle was that a little boy who trusted Jesus enough to give him what little he had, believing that Jesus would find a way to use it to feed the people. And the second miracle was that Jesus, when given what the little boy had, 5 small loaves, 2 small fish, he multiplied it and made it enough to feed the people. We have an opportunity on the 3rd Wednesday of every month to join Jesus in feeding the hungry, as we participate in the Lakeview Parish mission to feed homeless people. And this is something that I think everyone ought to think about. Maybe you would want to do it as a family. There's basically 3 things that go into this. One is to prepare some food. So maybe you might be interested in that. The second is to come and pull the food together and make the get it ready to be delivered. And the third is to deliver the food. So preparing the food could be done at home, could be done at church. Then assembling the food and getting it ready and cleaning up, and then delivering the food. You give them something to eat, Jesus said, to us, to the church. And we have the opportunity and privilege to do that. Let me tell you a little story which might help illustrate why this feeding ministry is so precious to me and to my wife, Janet. Janet worked as a deaconess, serving St. Stephen's meals at Epiphany Lutheran Church on Bainbridge Avenue in the Bronx. And people would come in to the church sanctuary itself, which was open to the community, and homeless people especially, and they would be fed. And there was also a pantry, and people could also bring other items home. And the church was the center of that feeding ministry. And one of the people who was homeless was someone named Stephanie, but she was also an evangelist. When we heard that she died alone on a subway car, Jan and I went to the memorial service. We sat in the quiet sanctuary watching the candles flickering and the people as they came in. Around us were many of Stephanie's companions in her life's sometimes tortured journey. She was a regular participant at St. Stephen's meals at Epiphany and worshipped in the church often. Like many of the homeless and poor in the neighborhood, Stephanie was not just a recipient of the church's ministry of compassion. She was also a church member with her own ministry. Epiphany still today offers community along with compassion, the bread of life at the Eucharist along with daily bread. And her ministry through Lutheran social services allowed my wife Janet to share in the ministry of Epiphany. Stephanie was close to her heart. The pastor at the funeral greeted the flock, a mixture of congregation members and neighbors, many of them homeless, most of them poor, some of them addicted, others with a variety of illnesses of body and mind. The pastor gathered us in the name of Jesus and lifted up Stephanie as one who shared Jesus with everyone who touched her life. It was Stephanie who took the new Bibles meant for the Sunday school children and took them and passed them out to the homeless and poor along Bainbridge Avenue. The pastor invited remembrance from the gathered children of God. It was in the midst of this testimony that I was filled with a kind of gratitude for the presence of Jesus in churches like Epiphany and in churches like ours when we feed the homeless. In the testimony that followed, I understood that Epiphany was not only a congregation for the poor, but also a congregation of the poor. Here was public sanctuary for the lament and comfort of the community. People spoke about times that Stephanie had prayed with them, encouraged them in trouble and tragedy, and always testified to the power and love of Jesus. A young lady so strung out and angry she could hardly stand still read a prayer from the Lutheran Book of Worship for those who are addicted. A man sitting in the front row who had at times been cruel to Stephanie cried out his loss and regret. A woman who had recently been homeless testified to the death and resurrection of Jesus and sang a beautiful spiritual gospel song. The refrain in each of the remembrances was the same. Stephanie was a friend of the poor and a lover, an evangelist of Jesus. We gave her up to Jesus in the commendation, prayerfully sending this homeless person to her room in God's house of many rooms, where a place has been prepared for Stephanie in her baptism. The cadence of the liturgy was touched by the chaos of broken lives, by anger, and sometimes rambling incoherence. This wasn't a feel-good story. Many who remembered Stephanie with themselves leave the church remembered by no one, at the edge of survival. But Jesus was the one who thought equality with God not something to be grasped, but emptied himself, humbled himself, and became obedient even unto death, even death on a cross. Broken lives await transformation in every one of our churches. And Stephanie comes to my mind and heart as St. Luke does this ministry with our parish. May God move our hearts to continue to be a part of answering Jesus' command. You give them something to eat, remembering the one who feeds us with daily bread and the bread of life.